not already done so, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. And finally, let me take this opportunity to thank Sally, Ashley, Melissa, Dean, Hillary, Marlena, and most especially Research Associate Sarah Mead for their help in organizing today's event. Thank you.
Thank you, Jarsis. I thank you all for attending in my presentation today at A.K.M. I believe that a stable and well-functioning labor sector is an absolute necessity for a country to be a tolerant, liberal, and a progressive democratic state. This presentation is a very small effort on my part in our ongoing struggle to establish productive industrial and labor relations in Bangladesh. I have divided my presentations broadly into 4 parts. In the first part, I shall talk a little about Bangladesh and its democracy. I will then discuss the country's legal system with respect to the rights of the workers. My focus will be mainly on the freedom of association and collective bargaining rights of the workers, particularly within the export processing zones or the EPZs in Bangladesh. In the third section, I shall discuss about the effectiveness of the workers' welfare associations with the EPZs. I will conclude with recommendations for various stakeholders to establish fair industrial and labor relations in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is situated in the Indian subcontinent in South Asia. It is bordered by India to its north, west, and east, by Burma to its southeast, and by Bay of Bengal to its south. In Bangladesh, more than 160 million people live in a territory of 56,000 square miles. It is the world's 8th most populous country, as well as one of the most densely populated countries in the world. 99% of the population speaks in Bangla, and Bangladesh got separated from Pakistan and became an independent country in March 1971, following a liberation war. Constitutionally, Bangladesh is a parliamentary democracy. The 2 main political parties, the A.K.M and the Bangladesh Nationalist parties, popularly known as BNP, have been ruling Bangladesh for the last 25 years. The last parliamentary election of Bangladesh held in 8th of January this year, and because the parties have failed to agree on the election procedure introduced by the A.K.M government, the main opposition party, the BNP, didn't take part in the election. That election was the most violent election in the history of Bangladesh, with months of protest, and strikes have caused more than 300 deaths in the country. The worst part of the election was that the Hindu communities of Bangladesh were targeted in the post-election violence. Thousands of Hindu homes and shops were burned down by the pro-Islamic Jamaat-e-Islami activists following the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's re-election in the election. So now I will give some information about Bangladesh's workforce. The total employed workforce in Bangladesh is about 55 million. Out of those, 29 million workers are involved in the non-agricultural sector, and significantly 4.2 million workers are employed in the RMG sectors, meaning the ready-made garment sector, which earns 75% of the Bangladesh foreign currency, which is about $22 billion US. The main industries apart from garments in Bangladesh are textile industries, fertilizer, fish and shrimp industries, jute goods, and leather products are among them. Now I will speak about the rights of the workers in the country. According to the Constitution of Bangladesh, all citizens are equal before the law. The Constitution also requires that the state will provide equal protection some restrictions. The Constitution of the Bangladesh has given the state the power to impose certain restrictions on those rights of the workers in the interest of morality and public order. In 1972, Bangladesh ratified the International Labour Organization's Convention 87 and 98, which concerned the rights of the workers' rights of organize and their rights to engage in collective bargaining. Like many other countries in the world, Bangladesh operates export processing zones, and these zones were established mainly to attract foreign investment and boost the export of the country. With minor exceptions, all the products of the EPZs are mandatorily be exported to the foreign countries. Currently, there are 8 EPZs throughout the country, and about 400 companies in the EPZs are now employing about 400,000 workers. Approximately 65% of them are women. EPZs are contributing significantly to the growth of Bangladesh economy. Now, 20% of the Bangladesh income from the export processing, 20% of Bangladesh income from the export is generated from the export processing zones enterprises. EPZs are administered by the Bangladesh Export Processing Zone Authority, which is under the Office of the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister is also the Chairman of the Board of Governors of the Bangladesh Export Processing Zone Authority. The CEO of the Bangladesh Export Processing Zone Authority, who runs the day-to-day affairs of the EPZs and the EPZs, is an in-service Army General, and the general law of the country does not applicable to EPZs, and the terms and conditions of service of EPZs, EPZ workers are strictly regulated by the EPZ authority. In the area of workers' rights to organize and collective bargaining, our country has 2 separate distinct systems. Bangladesh Labour Act 2006, the BLA, is the general labor law of the country. The BLA determines the rights and privileges of the workers employed mainly in the formal sectors of the country. It should be noted that BLA, the Bangladesh Labour Act 2000 Act, which is the general labor law of the country, is not applicable to NGOs, non-profit organizations, as well as in the enterprises of EPZs. Employees who have managerial authority are also not considered as worker under the level of Bangladesh. Those who are not considered as worker doesn't have any legal any statutory right in Bangladesh. Their services, their terms and conditions of services are generally regulated by the contract, which is popularly known in Bangladesh as the master and servant rule contract. Under the general level of the country, workers are, with certain restrictions, are permitted to form and join trade unions of their own choosing. Unions generally also have the right to collectively bargain with their employer following after raising industrial dispute, and they may enter into agreement with the employers on behalf of their member workers. Workers' rights in EPZs. As I have stated that the government of Bangladesh has ratified 2 ILO conventions, 87 and 98 in 1972, and these 2 conventions regulates the freedom of associations and the right to organize and collective bargaining of the workers. Yet when EPZs were established in the 1980s, just to attract the foreign investors, the government propaganda in that way that the investors will not be required to be hassled by the workers, and that's why they have exempted the EPZ law from the general law from the exemption from EPZ enterprises. As a result, there were no trade unions rights for the EPZ workers for a long time. But because of the pressure from the FLCA, American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Establishments, the government of Bangladesh was virtually forced to grant limited right to the workers of EPZs, and consequence of that, simultaneously two laws were promulgated, one in 2004 and another one in 2010. The 2004 law is no longer in existence because of the enactment of the 2010 Act. Under the EPZ law, workers are not permitted to form any trade unions in any of the enterprises, but the workers have been given the right to form workers' welfare associations, and with certain restrictions, of course. There can be only one workers' welfare associations per company and industrial unit, and there has to be a demand at least from the 30% of the workers from an enterprise to have workers' welfare associations in their enterprises. Workers' welfare associations by law are generally run by the executive councils who are elected by the workers of the respective enterprises. Legally, workers' welfare associations have the right to raise industrial dispute and as well as bargain and execute agreements with the employers. More than 50% of the enterprises, which is about 400, which is about 210 enterprises now have workers' welfare associations in their enterprises. So now I will talk about some of the realities and challenges of the workers' welfare associations. Although by law it is a very good, it's not good law. In plain reading, it may sound that it is a good law, but in reality, there needs a lot of reformation in the law. In reality, the workers at the EPZs are not allowed or not permitted to form their associations whenever they try to form their association or whenever they choose to form their association. Virtually, the formation of the workers' welfare associations in the EPZs are exclusively dictated by the EPZ authority as well as by the employers. And because of so many restrictions have been imposed on the formation procedure that workers simply cannot cannot organize themselves, cannot talk to the workers, talk to the fellow workers and form their association. Whenever they get the green signal, whenever the EPZ authority will say that, okay, this company is now ready for the workers' welfare association, then the workers can demand for the formation of the workers' welfare association. I can give you an example. Yangwon Corporation which is a Korean corporation. It is the biggest investor in the EPZs. They have 17 companies in the EPZs, in the different EPZs, and they have employed 17,000 workers in those companies. But in none of their companies there is workers' welfare associations, because they are the most powerful investors in the EPZs, and they can manipulate the EPZ authority not to have any workers' welfare associations in any of their enterprises. And the workers' welfare associations we have in the EPZs are also not working properly in the EPZs. The elected officials who actually are very much active in their work, who tries to bargain with the employers, they are instantly terminated from their services. They will not. In many cases, we see that. In many workers' welfare associations, there are no officers left to continue their functioning. One of the black provisions in the EPZ law is that the workers' welfare associations are not permitted to maintain any linkage with any NGOs or organizations out of EPZ. It means that they have to maintain. It means that workers' welfare association activities are totally guided and dictated by by the export processing zone authorities. And I have stated that there is lack of support from the unions and federations beyond EPZs. We have a lot of unions and federations in Bangladesh. Actually, we have 40 trade union national centers in Bangladesh. But surprisingly, we haven't seen any support from those centers to form, to allow the EPZ workers to form their associations or to allow trade union in the EPZ. This is one of the surprising areas in our labor movement. Now, what reactions we have got from the USA? Because of all the denials of the workers' rights, on June 27, 2013, US government suspended Bangladesh trade benefit under the generalized system of preference on, as I've said, on June 2013. The suspension means that Bangladesh will not get trade facilities which it used to get on certain products. And at the time of an announcement of the GSP suspension, US government also declared an action plan for Bangladesh with indication that if Bangladesh government can implement the action plan, then the GSP benefit may be reinstated in the near future. Now I will talk about something about the Solidarity Center, where I'm working for the last 18 years. Solidarity Center is an affiliate organization of the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations. And Solidarity Centers and FLCO, you may all know that FLCO is the largest trade union center in USA, and it's the largest federation of unions in the USA. Solidarity Center supports through its programs in more than 60 countries, and it has 24 field offices throughout the world. Solidarity Center through its programs is helping the workers everywhere to build stronger unions, and wants workers to stand up for their rights and overcome repression in their workplaces. Solidarity Center is also registered in Bangladesh as an NGO. Solidarity Center in Bangladesh mainly works in the three sectors. These sectors are ready-made garment sector, export processing zones, and shrimp and fish processing plants in the Kula area in the southeastern part of the Bangladesh. Solidarity Center's programs includes the training of the workers on the labor laws. It assists the workers in organizing, dispute resolution, and collective bargaining with the employers. Solidarity Centers works all the relevant stakeholders in Bangladesh, and these stakeholders are government and government agencies, employers, buyers, international and national NGOs, as to promote adoption and effective enforcement of the core labor standards in the different industries. Solidarity Center is also conducting legal assistance program for the workers of the above-mentioned sectors for the last 18 years. Now, the fourth part of my presentation, the recommendation part. My recommendation for Bangladesh is that it is the main stakeholders to ensure rule of law and freedom of association for the workers in Bangladesh. Clearly, the 2004 Act and 2010 Act could not deliver the result the expected results. Now, my recommendation is that Bangladesh government must take the initiative to reform the law wholesale, the EPZ law, in a wholesale manner. The core recommendation will be from me, will be to allow trade union in the EPZs, ILO Conventions 87 and 98. And one of my recommendations will be to the government of Bangladesh will be that the 65% of the workers are women. So in the legal reform, there should be adequate provisions so that the female workers can have meaningful participation in the trade union activities in the EPZs union that may be formed after the reformation of the law. My recommendation for the workers and unions. In Bangladesh, strong anti-union sentiments is persisting among many in the country. Therefore, the unions should be very careful in their role to promote freedom of association rights in the EPZs. To overcome the criticism of the unions must be formed and function democratically with the full participation of their members. Given the reality of Bangladesh, in my opinion, the unions and their activities must be free from the influence of the political parties. The unions must not be used as a tool to implement the agendas of the political parties. The activities of the unions must be devoted to promote the interest of its members and the workers as a whole, not for the political parties, not to implement the agendas of the political parties. My recommendations for the employers. Realistically, there is no doubt that the employers are one of the key stakeholders to ensure the rights of the workers. In any legal reform, I think, in my opinion, their views, their bodies must be given due consideration. In our country, we will hardly find any employer who are agreeable to accept any trade union in their enterprises. But for peaceful working environment, I would suggest that employers should reduce their opposition towards the unions and should come forward and join the process of dialogue to have well-functioning workers' unions in the industry. My recommendations for the buyers. Buyers and brands should continue sourcing from Bangladesh. They should not pull out from Bangladesh. That will do rather harm than good to the workers of Bangladesh. And they should continue to play their role to protect and promote the establishment of workers' rights in the industry. You may know that most of the buyers have their own code of conduct, and one of the codes require that the companies supplying products for them should abide by the laws of the country. So in that way, if the buyers, which are doing it to some extent, but they should do it more rigorously to enforce their code of conducts on the supplying companies. You know that there was two industrial accidents in 2012 and 2013 in Bangladesh, which have killed more than 1,300 workers in these two accidents. After that accident, an accord on fire and building safety in Bangladesh was signed to maintain minimum safety standards in the Bangladesh garments industry. International global unions, NGOs, and brands are the parties to that accord. And that accord is a binding accord and legally enforceable. Workers' representatives, as I have said, workers' representatives are one of the signatories in the accord. Binding arbitration will be used in that accord to resolve dispute and enforce companies' commitments under that accord. But surprisingly, most of the, just have to say that mostly the European brands have signed in the accord, but surprisingly, most of the leading North American brands decided not to join in the accord. And on July 2013, the North American, a group of 17 North American retailers, including Walmart and Gap, have announced their own Bangladesh worker safety initiatives, and the North American brands call themselves the Alliance for Bangladesh Worker Safety. of the alliance, Northern American alliance activities are not enforceable by the workers, and there is virtually no existence of the workers' representation in the implementation of their activities. So in this context, my suggestion will be, my urge will be to the North American brands to join the accord and to be a part of the implementation process to make the industry safer for the workers. If they do not want to join the accord at all, then my suggestion towards them will be to be transparent in their work and to involve the unions in the implementation procedure, in the implementation process of their activities in Bangladesh. So my recommendations to the United States of America. So USA is one of the biggest trading partners of Bangladesh, and over the years, US government's efforts to promote fair labor practice was very useful and has had given a very positive result as well. The suspension of GSP benefits may have hurt the reputation of Bangladesh in short term, but in the long term, I think the implementation of the action plan will bring measurable positive results for the workers as well as for the industry as a whole. It is quite important now that US government remain engaged with the government of Bangladesh and other stakeholders to ensure that the action plan is implemented very effectively. My recommendations to the NGOs, both international and domestic. Following the Rana Plaza accidents, now a lot of NGOs have landed in Bangladesh with ample financial resources to promote the safety standards in the workplace. It will be my recommendations to those international NGOs and their local counterparts that NGOs should ensure that their programs involve the unions in their activities. NGOs should also ensure that their programs assist the workers to form unions and allow form the unions and run and function the unions democratically and sustainably. We do not want to see a situation that the union will collapse after the NGOs pull out from Bangladesh. It is also quite important that NGOs coordinate and collaborate among themselves in their work in Bangladesh. It is difficult, but coordination among the NGOs should be there as much as possible to reduce the wastage of their time and resources. In the last slide, I have added three pictures of our labor movement. In the picture on the top left, we see that a union has executed agreement with the positive-minded management. In the below picture, in the right, we can see that the workers are very much peaceful in their labor movement. They are participating in a rally during a May Day program. And the picture on the right, we see that the workers can be very violent, and I would say that they are violent and with rightful reasons, I would say, because of the low density of the union, because of the lack of unions. There is no representation among of the workers, and if they cannot express their grievances through any mechanism, they do not have any choice but to go on the street to resort violence and demonstration in the street. So, lastly, I would want to say that the trade unions should be treated as an equal and important partner for the industrial stability in our country. If we cannot do that, the workers will continue to take the recourse of violence, and they will continue to be on the street to express their grievances and realize their demands from the employers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Xerxes, and thank you very much, Brother Nasim, for your presentation. Thank you to the National Endowment for Democracy for holding this program today. Really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of it. I wanted to make some general observations about Nasim's presentation, and then I wanted to offer some specific observations that come out of the sort of set of facts and the scenario and the landscape that he has laid out here, and how it's important not only for democracy in Bangladesh, but as a lesson for other countries in the region and elsewhere in the world that are subject to and part of this whole same global supply chain structure that produces similar stresses, tensions, and conflicts in countries in Bangladesh, but outside as well. Nasim has had the experience of watching this whole development of the export processing zones over the last 15 years, and probably has the best understanding of the legal underpinnings and the evolution of these zones of any lawyer in Bangladesh. I'm sure you remember the period in the 1990s when the in-flight magazines in Asia basically would have full-page, ads. Come to Bangladesh. There are absolutely no laws in our export processing zones. What was a selling point then is a liability, and they began to see that it was a liability to the smooth functioning of their economy and these zones. And eventually, under pressure, as Nasim talked about, laws, the movement toward promulgation of some basic laws to underpin some of these basic rights was undertaken in the 2000s. One of the things I think is interesting about the statistics that Nasim cites is that, well, the EPZs, if you do the numbers, they're all up on the screen, but if you do the numbers of the overall working population in the garment industry, for example, combine that with the export processing zones, and you look at how much foreign exchange is earned. Nasim's overview points out that the EPZs employ only about 8% as many workers as in the ready-made garment sector, but they account for 20% of Bangladesh's export earnings. And what's important about this is, in the export processing zones, it's not just all about garments. This is the gateway for Bangladesh to actually begin to manufacture other sorts of and more high value added goods for the international market. And this is a key if Bangladesh is going to essentially get off the low wage, low standard, low road approach to economic development. The kinds of things that are actually being manufactured in the EPZs are very important for future Bangladesh economic development. But it's not just about how you create these value-added goods, it's also about decent work and labor standards as well. You can't grow a middle class or a democratic culture by paying rock-bottom wages and subjecting workers to constant abuse. And I would say, in my experience in a lot of different countries in Asia, the working conditions I will say, put this out there, the working conditions in physical conditions in the export processing zones are generally better than they are outside the zones. That said, there is more to the idea of labor standards and the working life of workers than simply the physical environment. It has a lot to do with the way the factory is run. It has to do with quotas. It has to do with respect. It has to do with whether workers feel like they own some dignity at work as well. So this is a phrase, a lot of people have used this phrase before. Bangladesh is the poster child in the region for the excesses and abuses of the global garment supply chain. Tazreen fire, factory fire, and the Rana Plaza building collapse in 2013 were real exemplify this situation. Bangladesh is also important in this context for addressing the nexus between equitable economic progress and the sustained promotion of small d democracy. This is one of the reasons why what's going on in Bangladesh is so important. And it may be anecdotal, but I want to offer an anecdote that also reflects back into American labor history. we may be able to see the outlines of some opportunities and progress in Bangladesh. Of the 4 largest garment factory disasters in history, 3 of those 4 took place in the past 18 months. Okay? The 2 in Bangladesh that we referred to, and a factory fire in Karachi, Pakistan, that killed more than 340 workers. The 4th most worst garment disaster in history took place over 100 years ago in New York City. Okay? The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. There are 2 things here which I think are interesting to note. One is, if the 4 worst disasters happened over the last 100 years, 3 of those 4 took place in the last 18 months. It certainly suggests that there is more to economic development than the low-wage, low-standard road. It also suggests in Bangladesh, which I think is interesting, is what's relevant is here is to look at what happened after that tragedy in 1911, which was the catalyst in the United States for massive organizing of women garment workers. And it became a critically important aspect of democratic development in the United States in early 20th century. This is an example of a moment in history where a disaster like this can be seized upon by forces who really want to improve the situation and try to move that agenda forward. We're hoping that there is enough political space and opportunity for workers of Bangladesh to be able to seize their own historical moment in this context of the global supply chain. So I just wanted to offer a couple of other specific observations, highlight some points that Nasim made. One is, the slide had the very, very clear statement. Bangladesh is a country that continues to function under 2 legal regimes. There's one set of laws for one group of people and one set for another. The law that was passed in 2010, most recently, for the export processing zones, still falls short of international labor standards. And to sort of paraphrase certainly a school favorite book that a lot of us have read when we were in junior high school or high school in this country. In other words, all workers have some rights, but apparently some workers have more rights than others. While the worker welfare associations have been formed in many facilities, the government of Bangladesh has really stalled in its responsibility and progress to help create the better conditions in the export processing zones. About 5 years ago, Nasim said about 50% of the facilities now in the EPZs have functioning WWAs, worker welfare associations. About 4 years ago, 75% at least had these organizations that have been formed and voted on by workers. But in the intervening years, about a third of those, and if you look at those numbers, have either become moribund, have been destroyed by employers, have been effectively kept from functioning, and therefore, when workers are not able to exercise their voice and their leaders are victimized, they get the message that management is not, and the Export Processing Zone Authority are not interested in hearing what they have to say. The international pressure that has been there in part through campaigns, but also the GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences, has certainly helped keep a spotlight on this, and we are hopeful that with the continued focus on what's going on in Bangladesh, not just in the garment industry outside the zones, but also the conditions inside the zones, that there's an opportunity for some real progress there. And I think that we can point to some progress. In 2000, for example, in the garment sector, there are about 5,000 factories. Until, I don't want to drown too much in the numbers here, but until about 3 years ago, there were about 126 unions that had been formed in these garment factories. The vast majority of which were either politically connected, they weren't really looking out for workers' interests. There were maybe 2025 that were actually active. 2011, one new union was formed and registered. 2012, one new union was formed and registered. To date, since January of 2013, so a little over a year, we're approaching 100 new unions that have been organized in the garment industry in Bangladesh, the vast majority of which are actually democratic independent unions, neither controlled by the employer nor by political parties, which is a key point in Nasim's recommendations, which is extremely important in the Bangladesh context. You also outlined some of the remaining challenges for the Worker Welfare Association, so I'm not going to repeat them. One particular sort of point that Nasim mentioned that I think is a challenge not only for improving labor standards in Bangladesh, but it's a real challenge for the Bangladesh government, with which I would say certainly, I'm just stating my position here, that the AFL-CIO and the Solidarity Center are supportive of the Bangladesh government, and that is dealing with those corporations, especially the Korean companies in their own export processing zone, that refuse to abide by the law in Bangladesh. It's absolutely critically important for all manufacturers, all employers to understand that there's no exemption from the law and from actually fulfilling the law. And the Bangladesh government has a real challenge to be able to implement this situation, especially with regard to the Korean employers, but it's important to keep the spotlight on that as well. So I guess I'll just finish up real quickly. Only other observation I want to highlight is, which I mentioned earlier, is that Bangladesh is a crucible for the intersection of globalization, the Bangladesh government's economic policies, and how these impact on the development of a democratic culture and a civil society in Bangladesh. And this goes to the equitable and just economic growth that benefits workers and their families. A voice for workers in this process is absolutely crucial for growing democracy and democratic organizations in Bangladesh. And the last picture that Nasim referred to in his presentation here, I think really illustrates that. There's a tremendous amount of built-up frustration in a system where workers are really toiling at the wage and labor standards, lowest floor standards, certainly in Asia and for most of the world. And there's no opportunity to exercise a voice to try to change that situation. What's really important here, if there's going to be, in the context of growing democracy in Bangladesh, is that it's got to also come from the employer side. There has to be a willingness to engage in a serious relationship with workers. Otherwise, the very thing that the employers complain so much about is exemplified in that picture that we saw at the end of Nasim's presentation. So, just a few observations and why we see, as the Solidarity Center, the importance of connecting labor rights to equitable economic development and as a foundation for democracy in a country like Bangladesh.
Thank you, Tim, for your very insightful remarks. And I also want to thank you and Shana and your colleagues at the Solidarity Center for all the support you have provided to Nasim before, during, and I'm sure after his fellowship is over. I think that the success of his fellowship has as much to do with the role that the Solidarity Center has played as anything that we have provided here at NET. So thank you to all of you for your support. We now have time for questions. If you could raise your hand and identify yourself. Carl Gershman.
Thank you, Nasim and Tim. Nasim, could you elaborate a little bit on, I think it's implicit in what you were saying, but elaborate on the point you were making. You said that there was no support from unions and federations outside the export processing zones. Has there been an effort, and has the AFL-CIO made efforts, the Solidarity Center, to get the unions in Bangladesh to support the workers in the export processing zones? And what have been the problems? Is there a conflict of, division of labor where the organized workers are not supporting the unorganized workers? What's the problem?
The problem is, I would say that mainly, as Tim mentioned, that most of our trade union centers are politically connected with the political parties. So basically, the biggest trade union centers, the two we have, are linked with either with the ruling Awami party or with the BNP, the opposition party, which is now in the opposition. So their agenda is they always follow the agenda of their ruling of their party. So if consistently all the parties, although they have when they contest in the election, they will say that they will ensure workers' rights in the for all the workers of the country. But when they come into power, they just forget it, and they always keep the EPZ outside of the ambit of everything. So EPZ is administered in a very regimented manner, and they do not want anyone to touch the EPZ. So consistently it was the government of Bangladesh, all the governments' idea that the investors should not be disturbed. They want to send a message to the investors that, okay, if you can come here, we shall be able to give you relatively calm situation as far as workers' issues are concerned. So there are, as I have said, that we have more than 40 trade union centers, but the other centers are not that much powerful or vocal. But since the main trade union centers are not that agreeable to say or demand for the workers as the EPZ, because they want to and they are bound to follow their party line. That is the problem we have in our country, and that's why I have tried to suggest that those unions all unions that may be formed in the workers' welfare in the EPZ should not have any political connections and should be free from the influence of the political parties. I think I have covered.
Yeah, no, interesting, thanks.
Tim, do you have anything to add? Yes, we have two hands in the middle, and then Jitman.
Hi, thank you for the good presentation. I'm Chris Elms with the Department of State. I know that you noted in your presentation the GSP action plan and how we're able to engage the government of Bangladesh and use that as leverage to bring about reform. They have incentive through the GSP action plan to reform the laws in EPZs. However, successful reform and implementation will require buy-in from the companies. What incentive does EPZA have to engage in these reforms, and how can the U.S. government best, promote the conditions for those incentives?
Okay, as I have said that, as I have at least personally observed that unless there is pressure on the government or pressure on the EPZA, they will not move forward in respect of the workers' rights. So the 2004 Act, which was passed earlier, was also due to the pressure of the US government, because at that time FLCAO filed a petition to the USTR seeking suspension of the GSP facilities. At that time, because of the pressure again, they allowed some rights to the workers of EPZs. And as Tim mentioned that although FLCA was involved in the process of the enactment of those laws, but at the we knew from the very beginning, and FLCA also knew from the very beginning that for the to start with, that at that time the 2004 was okay to start with. But now, after 10 years, we cannot say that this is working for the So as far as the labor is, as far as the pressure on the EPZ authorities are concerned, I would say that there should be, I have to say, I hate to say this, but there should be continuous pressure on the government of Bangladesh and on the WebS authority to reform the law. Because again, I want to say that if that suspension would have been come 3 or 4 years back, we would not have seen the Rana Plaza accident or Tasdin fire. Because now we see that because of the suspension of the GSP facilities, government is actually moving now. They are moving forward and they are taking positive steps, I would say. Everyone has to acknowledge that. So this is an area that, again, I have to say that for Bangladesh, still pressure works. They do not move on their own until some sort of pressure is on their head.
Just to clarify, for those who may not be as attuned to trade issues, the GSP is the Generalized System of Preferences, and as I understand, they confer trade benefits, and those were suspended because of Bangladesh's non-compliance with the international labor standards. The suspension took place in June of 2013. Tim, you have something to add?
Yeah, just a couple of points regarding particular pressure on the EPZs. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of products that are made in the EPZs that are not garments and are subject to GSP. Garments, and again, yes, it's good that you explain the trade law because it can be really arcane. But the idea basically is to remove these trade benefits and put the pressure on Bangladesh to improve the situation, even if some of the goods that are not necessarily directly affected. Garments are not directly affected, but in the export processing zones, there are goods that are. The second thing is, and this is a question of political will, unlike the rest of industry outside the export processing zones report directly to the office of the Prime Minister. There's a direct line to come down from the Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister says, do this, then BEPSA, chaired by a in-service military man, is bound to, should be bound to be able to make changes faster than the sort of huge sort of ship of 5,000 garment factories out there and all of the different competing manufacturers. So if political will and a demonstration of political will and moving in the right direction is useful in this whole context of restoring GSP and refurbishing brand Bangladesh, then the export processing zones could be very important in that regard.
Thank you. We had another question in the middle.
Yeah, thank you very much for your thoughtful presentation and remarks. It was very helpful. My name is Jessica Slattery. I'm also with the State Department. I had a question. I think that you recommended that in your recommendation section, amending existing EPZ laws and then integrating those laws to apply them to the whole country, as opposed to the other way around, applying the Bangladesh Labor Code to the EPZs. And I'm wondering, I assume that that's because you believe that EPZ laws to be more attuned to worker rights, even though they're perhaps not being implemented in that way. What specifically can you identify that is different and maybe more attuned to worker rights in the EPZs that is different from the Bangladesh Labor Code?
Okay, as I have said that we have two different legal systems, and we have the general labor law and the Bangladesh EPZ Act in respect of the freedom of associations and collective bargaining issues. Bangladesh Labor Act 2000, I'm still not saying that the Bangladesh Labor Act 2006 should be applicable to EPZ wholesale. Because the Bangladesh Labor Act 2006, although we have seen some amendments, it itself is not a good law yet. And it may happen that if the Bangladesh Labor Act 2006 is made applicable for the EPZs right now, it may create more problems than solving some of the remaining problems. why I'm saying the chronology should be like this, maybe like could be like this, that the Bangladesh Labor Act 2006 should be amended first in a proper manner, then it can be applicable to the EPZs. But what we'll do in the meantime, it may take years for Bangladesh Labor Act 2006 to be amended to a satisfactory level. That's why the US Action Plan also requires that the EPZ should be brought into the conformity of the in the same line of the general law. So we can, alternatively, the EPZ law can be reformed, which will be easier for the given the consideration, given the reality, to make it more in the line of the ILO code level standards.
Jitman has a question, Mike Allen has a question, and then we have two other hands up so far.
Thank you, Nasim and team, for your wonderful presentation.
And if you could just...
My name is Jitman Basne from Nepal, currently fellow at NET. I have a question. As you mentioned, Tajrina fire and Rana Plaza collapsed, and yesterday, two of the owner of the Tajrina factory, Delwar Hussain, surrendered before the court, and they were sent to custody. So how are you hopeful, how much you are hopeful from the current justice process in Bangladesh?
The fact that apparently you can say that the two accused have surrendered and they have been sent to jail. But after how long? It took us 1.5 years to get them and send them into custody. In 1.5 years, the employers of agencies, employers associations have registered successfully so that those accused are not arrested and not sent to jail. So because of the severe pressure from the different angle, those accused were forced to surrender before the court and were sent to jail. Because they have surrendered just before yesterday, but the warrants were issued long time back. But although warrant of arrest was there, but they were running openly, and police were not arresting them. So after the clearance from the government, not from the government, clearance from the owners association, then the accused have surrendered, and they have been charged with the bailable offense. So at some point they will be again on bail, and given the current trend in our country, it will take a long time to settle these cases.
Mike?
Mike Allen with the Net. I wonder if you could clarify the nature and the function of the workers' associations, the welfare associations. I'm a little confused. You said that they, for example, have the right to collective bargaining, but it's usually denied. But do they otherwise function as genuine trade unions? Do they have the right to represent workers in grievance and disciplinary procedures, for example? Are they purely workplace-based? Or can they organize across the welfare, the enterprise zone? Do workers pay dues, have genuine memberships? Or alternatively, are they, in effect, kind of alternatives or substitutes for genuine trade unions, something akin to the solidarismo movement that we saw in Central America a few years back?
Okay. As I have said, that legally those workers' welfare associations are entitled to collectively bargain with the employers. But because of the restrictions, I would not say that legal restrictions, the administrative restrictions, they cannot bargain with the employer. So the terms and conditions of the workers in EPZs are effectively dictated by the WEBs authority. They can issue instructions from time to time that what will be the standards of the workers, what benefits will be workers. So I can tell you one thing that when the GSP petition was under review last year, WEBs authority submitted a reply to the USTR. In that reply, they stated that union has submitted charter of demand to the employer, but some of the demands are not within the purview of the law. So it means that in the ideal situation, if the workers are permitted to collectively bargain and raise industrial disputes, it means that they can ask more than what law has already given to them. But the WEBs authorities and employers are not ready to accept that they will give anything which is beyond the law. So it is in writing, Bangladesh, the WEBs authority has stated, and it backfired for them, that if you say that in the law the workers are allowed to raise industrial disputes, file charter of demands for better benefits, for enhanced benefits. On the other hand, how can you say that the workers are the demands are some of the demands are beyond the law? So these are the contradictions, and you have rightly said about the dues thing, that for a union or for a workers welfare association to be very much sustainable, they will be able to collect dues from the members, and they are under the law again. They are allowed to collect dues from their members, but because of the restrictions, lot of restrictions, they are not allowed. The government is not, but the WEBs authority and the employers are not allowing the workers associations to open even bank account, because if you collect dues, those dues cannot be kept in the pocket of any officer. Those dues have to be kept in any bank account. And since the workers welfare associations are not able to open even a bank account, they are still unable to collect dues from the workers. And to make the workers welfare association dependence on the employers, the WEBs will always tell the workers welfare association that you need not to collect dues from your members. You just tell us, we'll manage things, we'll manage your employers, and they will provide you all the necessary things you require for your functions. In that way, the functions are being restricted for the and as far as whether the workers welfare association can be termed as or can be considered as trade unions, I would say that no, it cannot be, because the formation procedure is very restrictive. Workers under the law, workers cannot even a worker cannot even talk to his fellow worker about the formation of the workers welfare association. If I want to form a association, I will have to submit my demands in writing to the WEBs authority. I have no right to discuss with the other fellow workers that okay, let's join us together and we'll submit our demands together. It is again prohibited by law. So there requires a lot of changes, and the present system, we cannot say that they are enjoying any collective bargaining rights or freedom of association rights in any manner.
Nasim, I wonder if I could just jump in and ask you to say a word about the particular role of women. You had mentioned in one of your recommendations to the government to increase the participation of women. But tell us a little bit about how involved or uninvolved, how active or inactive women are within the EPZs, trade unions, the welfare associations, and also in the ready-made garment industries and other industries outside the EPZs.
sectors, 85% of the 65% are female in EPZs, and 85% of the workers are female in outside of EPZs. But we do not see much representation of the female workers in the leadership positions, and that's why I have suggested that there should be some mandatory directives in the law that the certain percentage of the leadership positions should be occupied by women, because traditionally Bangladesh is a conservative country. Female workers do not want to come forward to take the leadership position, although we have president, although our prime minister, leader of the opposition, parliament, speaker of the parliament are female, but in the ground, in the workforce, the workers are very conservative. The female workers are still not eager to come forward to take the leadership position. That's why I am suggesting that there should be some sort of mandatory provisions in the law that a certain amount, certain percentage of the leadership positions should be filled up by the female workers.
Thank you. We have a question in front, Ms. Sally.
Hello, I am Shafik Islam, the Council of Commerce in the Embassy in Bangladesh, here in Washington, D.C. I got a question as well as some comments. First, the question, Mr. Nasim, thank you for your good presentation. But in the presentation, you mentioned that Solidarity Center is registered as an NGO, and also Solidarity Center works in 3 areas. EPZ is one of their work area. Also, in another slide, you mentioned that in EPB, as per the existing law of the EPZ, no outside NGO can be contacted, or no relationship can be maintained with any NGO. So isn't it a contradiction? So I accept some
Yes.
And now the comments, it's good, but the impression, from your presentation, it reflects that particularly the Bangladesh government is very indifferent to the plight of the workers, and they are working as an impediment to the bring the EPZ law or to improve the workers genuine demands. So it gives some tilted reality to my view. As a government representative, I need to give an impression that government is doing its best, given this scenario, because the government has a very tricky balance, to keep the tricky balance, to keep all the stakeholders, protecting the interest of the investors as well as the workers, employers, everybody has to be protected. The government has the role to protect everybody. So since the 2 unfortunate incidents, Azrin fire and as well as the Rana Plaza, those incidents have really acted as a catalyst, for bringing a permanent and lasting solution, improvement to the overall scenario. And you know that even today, in the Bangladesh newspaper, online newspapers, it mentioned that the EPZ Worker Welfare Association is getting the right to call even strikes, to work as a collective bargaining. The Prime Minister has approved today, and also so many activities are happening. It's happening not only for the pressure from the US government or EPZs, from the inner civil society. I mean in Bangladesh, within Bangladesh, a lot of stakeholders. So many forums, seminars, workshops going on. Thank you.
So about the contradiction of the law, you say that Solidarity Center works. I have said that the workers' welfare associations are not entitled to maintain linkage with the NGOs. But fortunately, it didn't say that the workers are not entitled to maintain linkage with the EPZ, the NGO. That's why Solidarity Center very legally is conducting programs with the workers of the EPZ workers. So legally, I would say that Solidarity Center is not violating any law of the country, because you know that constitutionally every citizen has the right to have movement, they can associate with others, but what I'm telling that because of that restrictive provisions, the workers' welfare associations are unable to grow themselves. They cannot, institutionally, they cannot take the help of the NGOs, the assistance of the NGOs, they cannot participate in their NGOs. So that is what, in other areas we will not see such an restrictions. Student unions are not barred to maintain linkage, maintain connection with NGOs. Political parties are also not barred to maintain connection with the NGOs. So only even the workers' unions, which are operating outside of EPZs, they are also not barred to maintain linkage with the NGOs. So this is the area in the EPZs that certain restrictions, undue restrictions have been imposed on this. And about the efforts of the Bangladesh to improve the standard, I have stated very clearly that there is very much positive efforts on the governments going on to improve the situation of the laborers in Bangladesh. And I agree that to some extent Bangladesh government is in a sandwich situation. As far as EPZ is concerned, they have to take care of the investors also, and they have to keep the investment in Bangladesh, because initially the government has have invited them by saying that there is no trade unions in the EPZ. There shall not be in the EPZ. Now they have to reverse their position. So they have to. The Bangladesh government is also in a very tricky situation to convince the investors also to accept the trade unions in the EPZ. That's why I have said that I have recommended for the employers also that they should reduce their opposition towards the union. They should also join in the process of the dialogue, and their views and their opinions shall have to be also be taken into consideration. So I'm not squarely blaming on the government of Bangladesh or trade union, but what I would say that all the stakeholders will have to work very closely and coordinatedly so that the problems we have right now we can overcome.
Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Hello, I'm Richard Miller from Continuing Education and Workforce. I want to thank you for your presentation today. I had the distinct pleasure of being accompanied by Nasim to one of the export processing zones when we were in Dhaka last year. And what was most striking, just as a reflection, was that when we met in this tiny little room, which was the office designated for the Worker Welfare Association, in sweltering heat, they were all men in a factory where fully 80% of the employees in the factory were women. And we asked the men, why is it, my boss, Congressman Miller, was with me, and asked, why is it that there are no women represented here today? And so I would commend you for your idea and thought that as we think about reforms, when the man responded the women aren't interested, one had to ask what the social norms were in that setting and what can be done to overcome those. But my
Bangladesh, I think in many other countries also, a court proceedings takes a long time to settle. So I know that particular case. So if you can just go to the court and convince the judge of the High Court that matter is supposed to, is not legal, or I just want to say that if you can convince the court, and if you can obtain a stay order from the court, then you are safe for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. So that has happened in that case. But as far as the authority of the investors are concerned, I would say that they are being patronized by the WEBSA authority. Because when they have filed a case against the WEBSA is supposed to defend that case and go to the court and insist for an early hearing. But they will not do that. They will just sit on their case and they will just sit on it and see that, okay, how long, they will wait for the hearings and it will take 10 years to be completed. So that is the things going on. And to your simple, to answer you simply, I will say that I have to go into more detail, that the WEBSA officials who run the WEBSA are very much inclined to support the activities of the investors associations. They rather, if you have been there and you know that when you talk to the workers in the general public, are you satisfied with the activities of the, if you ask the workers that are you satisfied with the WEBSA officials who run the IR department, and they all will say that that no. So there is also a confidence issue also. None of the workers, most of the workers, I would say, have no confidence on the officials of the WEBSA.
Thank you. It's time for us to wrap up. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank Tim for his observations. Again, the shout out to the Solidarity Center for its support of Nasim, and most of all, to commend you on your staunch and unswerving support for the rights of workers in Bangladesh. Nasim, it's been such a pleasure and honor to